This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Between two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and a VPN, you try to be in control of how your info is protected. But many other places also have it, and they might not be as careful. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast for 40% off. Terms apply.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, how to get 30, how to get 20, 20, 20, how to get 20, 20, how to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
I'm Dahlia Lithwick, and this is Amicus, Slate's podcast about the courts, the law, and the Supreme Court.
All of this is about power. All of it is about the protection of power, but for a single person. And that is the person that is Donald Trump.
It is really hard to look at the ways in which President Donald Trump, his administration, and his Republican Party are willing to break rules, norms, institutions, and break the law without concluding they actually have zero fear that someday Democrats will wield all those powers against them. Put more bluntly, they are not behaving like people who believe they will ever face accountability at the ballot box. A perceived immunity from accountability of any sort, ever, is finding expression in so many of the destructive acts of this second Trump administration. Last week, we focused on the immigration piece of that rampage. This week, we wanted to turn our attention to civil rights. Now, we have talked separately about the evisceration of the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department, the weaponization of civil rights protections against diversity in higher education, and SCOTUS's delivery of death by 1,000 cuts to the Voting Rights Act. But we wanted to take a step back and try to knit all of this together in a way that educates and empowers us to think about it as a unified whole. Maya is the president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, a coalition of more than 240 national organizations fighting to protect, defend, and expand the rights of every person in the United States. A nationally respected civil rights attorney, Wiley has been a litigator at the ACLU, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She has also worked in the civil division of the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. I know her as a fellow MSNBC News analyst, and her memoir, Remember You Are a Wiley, was published just last fall. Maya, welcome to Amicus.
Well, Dahlia, it's always great to be with you.
Maya, as I just said above, you are here to help us understand the larger story of what is happening to civil rights and voting rights in America. But to begin, I thought we should focus in briefly on a story that has been dismissed by many folks as just spectacle or absorbed in this classic mode of, oh, go ahead, pop the popcorn, let's watch and see if this time MAGA really implodes. But actually, the daily headlines about the Jeffrey Epstein files are, I think, a story about immunity from accountability and the conferring of that immunity onto others, and also the corruption of institutions that are sworn to protect Americans. And it kind of seems that between Mike Johnson shutting down Congress and Trump sending his deputy attorney general over to have a chat with a convicted sex trafficker about what she knows, it really seems as though we have reached a very chilling new low in both the Justice Department and the Republican Congress, now just doing the work of Donald Trump's private law firm.
You know, it is more than just a spectacle, but let me say why, because Dahlia, I think you put it well. It is because it is fundamentally about protecting power to the exclusion of people, real people. That's really at the core what all of this is about, every single thing we are going to talk about. So the core of the Jeffrey Epstein story, in my view, is, to your point, about accountability, transparency, appropriate transparency, right? Let's just be clear, because victims should be protected. Their privacy should be protected. They should be cherished and cared for. And our criminal justice system is supposed to do that. That's why we have sealed grand jury transcripts. But it's to protect the victims. It's not to protect victimizers. And so at the core of this is an incredible abuse of power. And all you have to say is a high-ranking official in the Department of Justice doing a president's personal bidding with someone convicted of very serious crimes. Possibly to consider where there's a way to extract a quid pro quo, a this for that. You're in prison. You probably don't like that. Look what they did with Eric Adams in New York, facing federal prosecution on corruption charges, but they wanted a this for that on mass deportations and getting a sitting mayor to violate sanctuary city laws to do it. All of this is about power. All of it is about the protection of power, but for a single person. And that is the person that is Donald Trump. The other side of this, though, that is really a part of this story around transparency and accountability is how we got here in the first place. They blew up lies and conspiracy theories about the deep state. It is the same kind of conspiracy theories they're utilizing to roll back all our rights and to do it with impunity, despite the fact that it violates existing law, that it violates case law precedent of the Supreme Court, that we have a majority of the Supreme Court that is complicit, and that it ignores the powers of Congress both to pass laws and to appropriate funds. And the executive branch is not supposed to get to say, yeah, nah, we're not doing that. It's all the same story.
Say one more beat about that, Maya, because I think I'm following you. I mean, I think I'm following you saying that Trump talking about, all the rapists that come in from foreign countries. I mean, every single sort of predicate, that all the people who are stealing birthright citizenship, like every single one of these larger initiatives. And of course, this goes back to vote fraud, right? And stolen elections. Everything is being weaponized, and it's being weaponized, as you say, rooted in a conspiracy theory that they are coming to do this, and then you kind of instantiate all the policies, right, that are going to end civil rights. And I think you're also saying, but maybe I'm wrong, Maya, that this is a weird case in which the they and the conspiracy is actually coming home to roost, and it's going after the perpetrators of the conspiracy theory.
This is a bonfire that Donald Trump and his minions created. They pulled the twigs together, they set them alight, and they've been fanning them and blowing oxygen on them for a very long time. And now they're starting to get burned by those flames. That's what's happening here. But yes, the underlying point is my point. You said it well, Dahlia. And let's consider Donald Trump, who has built and it's not just Trump, it's Trumpism. I don't want to make it only about Donald Trump. I mean, Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon. There's a whole ideological wing that is an extremist wing that has been blowing conspiracy theories about Black people, about Latino immigrants, sometimes specifically Mexican immigrants, that has been using the Great Replacement theory, which is not only anti-Semitic, it is the underpinning of hate against all of us, who are people of color, who are transgender, who are women, who are, right? There is a very extremist, dangerous underpinning to some of the base here that has intentionally been driving conspiracy theories of deep state, of Great Replacement, and utilizing that to drive fear about our government and to drive fear in the absence of facts that suggests things are being stolen from people who are experiencing some real pain. And I think we need to acknowledge that, right? There are real problems. We do have inequalities that run to wealth inequality, that run to corporations being able to run rampant over people, that we're not sufficiently creating jobs, that the rent is too damn high and people can't afford mortgages. All these things are real, and things that people are experiencing are real. But this extremism underpins coming for voting rights. It underpins coming for immigrants. It underpins the building of the argument that says we should unravel the pillars of our democracy, which is what civil rights are. They literally set up the underpinnings that ensure a democracy. That's voting rights, that's inclusion, that's making sure we're looking at problems across communities, across differences, to ensure that everybody's getting an equal opportunity and that government is functioning to do that in a balanced way, and that people have the ability to go to government and complain. What this administration, which is now a regime, has done is utilize the tools of white supremacy. It has utilized the tools of that organized and financed extremism to stoke fear, to stoke lies, to create and give much more oxygen to the conspiracy theories, including the deep state conspiracy theories that are Jeffrey Epstein, that you can't trust government, so dismantle it. In fact, that we should turn the Department of Justice into a weapon to vindicate Donald Trump's personal interests, but we will defend it. The conspiracy theories help defend that behavior as a way of protecting those who need protection from these conspiracies. So Jeffrey Epstein has been a part of that. It has been something that Donald Trump's supporters have been perfectly willing to utilize in the Epstein case when it was going to be something they could utilize against the Clintons. And let's be honest, those of us who want transparency don't care who is identified. The point is to get to the truth, to see whether others who have perpetrated crimes should be held accountable. It's about victims. But again, this is all of a piece, and the conspiracy roots all come from the same tree. And it is one that has been bearing fruit for them, but it's poison fruit. And now they're getting a little taste of that poison.
So that's probably a perfect segue to the real reason I so desperately needed to talk to you at the end of the term, Maya, which is voting rights and civil rights, because we're about to come up on the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, or whatever's left of the Voting Rights Act, in just a few short weeks. And I'm feeling a little elegiac. It didn't turn out to be the story of the Supreme Court term, although I reserve the right to think it will be next term. And I wonder if you can just talk briefly about, and maybe again framed exactly as you just framed the Epstein story, as a story of something that was the crown jewel of what we thought of as equality and civil rights, dismantled before our very eyes, under a whole bunch of conspiracy theories and a whole bunch of grievances, some of which I guess are to credit you, deeply felt grievances. And talk a little bit about what the dismantling of the Voting Rights Act, as I say, in front of our very eyes, looks like and is being felt around the country.
This one is so painful and so dangerous to all of us, no matter who we are, no matter who we vote for or whether we vote at all. Let me start with one thing that listeners may not know. The Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights is the nation's oldest and largest civil rights coalition. And we really do look like America. Over 240 national organizations representing folks of every ideology all over America, right? But born of the Black liberation struggle. And one of our shining achievements was winning passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and every reauthorization since. So we have always seen this as a critical underpinning to do what democracy is supposed to do. And this is why I want to start here. What is a democracy for? There are different forms of government, right? But what a democracy is for is the ability of people to come together and identify their problems and work on solutions. That's really at its core what democracy is. And the electoral part of that, of choosing leaders who are going to understand those demands and those problems and sell themselves on it and have us lend them our power to help accomplish those things, is what is fundamental to the Voting Rights Act. And as you know, and I think as all your listeners know, we did have to have a civil war and pass new constitutional amendments to actually create any kind of protection for the right to participate in identifying our problems as Black people and demanding that they get solved. And this is important. It was never only about, but meaning Black people are the ones being excluded and other people of color, right? Native Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans. It also benefited a lot of people who were white, who were having a hard time voting because there was so much will on the part of politicians to figure out how to keep Black voters out or Latino voters out or Native Americans out. That also hurt white voters. The reason it's so important to say that is we forget that under the current conspiracy theories and attacks. And they're not new. They are not new. What we're seeing now is a battle we have been fighting for decades and, in fact, for centuries, which is to battle the lies that say that we don't have a good election system, that we can't trust it, that we have to erect barriers to the ballot box, make it harder to get there because we have to worry about its integrity and whether people aren't trying to steal elections. And I want to tell you a story because we're also coming up on the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, right? At a time when we're watching FEMA be dismantled and people and those babies in Texas who are not coming home because of flooding and the inability to get an answer to a call from FEMA, right? When I was driving between Biloxi, Gulfport, and New Orleans, working on rebuilding post-Katrina, right? So 2006, 2007. If you listen to conservative radio, which was the primary news source driving between those two places, what I was hearing in 2006 and 2007 is people shouldn't want health care reform. People shouldn't want, by the way, health care reform wasn't on anybody's ballot. But people shouldn't want health care reform because, quote unquote, illegals were crossing the border to come take your health care. That is part of the roots of this tree I'm talking about, right? So we've been hearing it across the board for a long time, the connection between and Black people having fewer polling sites to go to and pretending that's not racism, pretending that's not an effort to say, we know how you'll vote and we don't like it, so we'll make it harder for you to vote. So we've been fighting this for a very long time. The difference now is the point, because Trumpism has been so effective at blowing oxygen onto this bonfire, what's become a bonfire of lies about our election system. It has enabled for a while now, and you've been following this, so you know for years now, the slow chipping away at those rights and the ability of states to go back to what are like the poll taxes, like the jelly bean counting, like the asking people to name every single judge in the state in order to prove they should be able to vote. Only now we're doing it on prove you're a citizen. Now we're doing it on whether or not you have to stand in line for 6 hours to vote. Now we're doing it on whether or not people can help you if you need help, if you have issues getting your ballot to the ballot box. Now we're seeing all these new forms of challenges, which is literally taking out tens of millions of Americans who are legally allowed to vote, who are registered to vote, from their ability to vote. We're doing it in a way that's going to primarily harm Black, brown, Asian, Native American people. And we're going to say it's okay because we've already vilified those folks through those conspiracy theories.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help find you options within your budget. Try it today at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. With summer in full swing, you probably want to refresh your closet a bit, but not waste a bunch of money on pieces you're only going to wear once. For timeless, elevated classics that feel really luxurious, check out Quince. Absolutely loving this Italian pebbled leather sling bag in cognac. This is more or less the only travel accessory you need for planes and trains and automobiles. You can wear it as a crossbody bag, and it is weirdly perfect for being both fabulous and also kind of casual. By working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middlemen, Quince gives you luxury without the markup. Think 100% European linen tops starting at $30, washable silk dresses and skirts, and soft cotton sweaters, versatile warm weather pieces you'll reach for again and again. Give your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/amicus for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/amicus to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/amicus. So, Maya, one of the things that I would love to have you just work through with me is that everything you're saying is, in fact, sort of the original sin here, right? Hollowing out every single entity that protects civil rights, civil liberties, voting rights, religious liberty, equality. That's right. That's where we are. That's where, in some sense, the last Trump administration brought us. But there's this really sordid other layer, which is then reconfiguring all of those institutions to make claims that the only vulnerable minority in America is white Christian men.
Correct. And saying it out loud in Project 2025. I mean, literally saying that quiet part out loud. That's the permission given by all of this bonfire building.
So, when you bring in white South Africans and you say they're refugees who are, suffering, or when you say that the entire vision now of, the civil rights protections at the Justice Department is going to be to protect Christians.
Not just protect them, but make sure to go and prosecute everyone else. Prosecute everyone else for trying to vote. I mean, we've essentially watched this administration turn the department within the Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division, which was created and empowered to protect and enforce civil rights laws, is now being it's literally being flipped on its head because Project 2025 wrote it. This administration is doing it because it benefits Donald Trump personally and politically, is to make it a weapon. It's now a sword and not a shield. In fact, this Department of Justice brought a suit in North Carolina, a sword against voting rights in North Carolina, rather than what they should be doing, which is bringing suits to protect voters. It is literally using its power to try to make it harder for people of color to vote. This is the connection to the Jeffrey Epstein story, right? Because underpinning this for Donald Trump is utilizing these lies, as he did in the 2020 election. And we know from the January 6th committee with lots of evidence that he knew they were lies, that the 2020 election was stolen from him, fomenting political violence, including at our Capitol, trying to stop the constitutional process of Congress certifying the election. That is an example of where and how those conspiracy theories have been intentionally utilized, but where the Jeffrey Epstein-like deep state is a critical underpinning to get people there, right? It is those kinds of, you really can't trust government, you're doing right by going up against and rebelling against government. But it's also the exact same proof point. It's like, I'm just trying to protect my ability to abuse power as a president. I'm just trying to make sure I can do what I want to do, no matter what the law says. And I'm going to utilize that power, including the power of my appointments and my pen, to try to take rights away and to not only disembowel government's ability to serve people, whether that's serving them in disaster recovery, serving them in schools, or serving them by protecting them from very obvious rights violations of states, like voting rights.
It's a feature, not a bug, that if along the way, as you use government to take rights from some classes of people and confer rights on other classes of people, and at the same time, you discredit entire institutions so that nobody believes that elections are fair. Nobody believes that the Justice Department prosecutors are genuinely doing their job. Nobody believes that district courts should have the power to grant universal injunctions. Well, that's a feature, right? Because all you're doing is sowing the ground for the sort of authoritarian takeover of all institutions because nothing works.
Right. And that is a point. And really the pattern of authoritarianism across the globe, the pattern of these bully dictator wannabes who maybe win or steal power, but then to hold on to it, know that it is the driving of division. It is the driving of wedges between people. And those wedges everywhere in this globe is the people who are the minorities, the people who have suffered discrimination, the people for whom there are already stereotypes and tropes. And then you can take everyone else's needs, even those who are not racist, by the way. I mean, not everyone who voted for Trump is racist. A lot of people voted because they wanted to disrupt government because it doesn't work for them and they don't like it. And they believed he would do that. Now, I'm not making a comment about what I think, but there are people who voted for him for that reason and who are kind of going, wait, what? Because it's not quite what they expected. But I say that because what authoritarianism does and has done in other places, which we're seeing roll out here, is drive those divisions. There's a reason Donald Trump started on day one with attacking diversity, attacking equity, and attacking inclusion, and attacking accessibility. There's a reason why when a plane crashes and devastates over 60 families, because their loved ones have now been killed in an accident. And then he blames people with disabilities. You utilize and do all these things because it is how you tell people, don't worry about how I am destroying everything around you. I'm asking you to be distracted from that so I can consolidate my power without you complaining, so that you can think I'm doing it in service when actually I'm doing it in selfishness. And that's the playbook, and that's what we saw. That's what we saw right after the inauguration. That's why diversity, equity, inclusion was the first thing out the box, and repeatedly. It's a quote unquote talking about merit. You can call it whatever you want. Americans like diversity. They like equity. They like inclusion. But when you don't use the words, you just say DE&I, and then you claim it's about coming for white men who are Christian and that's unfair, so that you can unravel everything else for what is a vast majority of the country. And by the way, in the end, it also hurts white men who are Christian, eventually, because tyranny will not serve them.
I am not always at my most sanguine that there are going to be free and fair elections at the midterms and the next presidential elections. And I kind of tell myself every data point you and I have just sketched out, I said this in my introduction, seems to illuminate the fact that they don't think they're going to be free and fair elections. And we certainly have heard, President Trump say, you only have to vote in this election. And now we are seeing in Texas, right, efforts to just gerrymander a couple of seats up out of nowhere.
Which isn't even popular with a lot of Republican voters in Texas, by the way.
Once you start really fussing with electoral systems, put aside the vote suppression, you've talked about voter ID, you've talked about long lines. We know that a component of Project 2025 is to restrict voting, and we know that the president has already signed executive orders.
It's literally, these steps are in the Project 2025 explicitly, you're right.
So I would love for you to reassure me, Maya, because I think what you said before is really central here. We need to be able to critique these moves and at the same time defend the proposition that your vote matters. Your vote will matter. You should register. In other words, if in fact discrediting the idea of voting is the feature, not the bug, I would love for you to explain to me how they're not going to just manipulate the vote out of existence before the midterms.
Well, I'm going to say they can't unless we let them. So you're right about what they are intentionally trying to do. Project 2025 said go prosecute state election officials who, quote unquote, worked against Trump in 2020, right? Not the direct quote, but it's explicit. Actually turn the Department of Justice and the Civil Rights Division into a sword. It's explicit about that. Donald Trump personally directed Greg Abbott because his own state Republicans didn't like the idea of doing redistricting. But Donald Trump doesn't want Republicans to lose control of the House of Representatives, his trifecta, his ability to go unchallenged and without oversight to all these abuses of power and violations. So what does he do? He calls Greg Abbott and says, get it done. And Greg Abbott is now shoving redistricting after only 4 years down the throat of Texans, even though 41% of Republicans don't think it's necessary. And 63% of Texans don't think it's necessary. But I'm saying this because the intention is clear. They are down 2 seats in the House, the Republican Party. If they can pick up 5 seats in Texas, they can maintain control. It's very clear. So that plus, literally using the powers of the Department of Justice to sue states, to make it harder for states to help voters, to all the things. Trying to make over 20 million voters lawfully allowed to vote, unable to vote in federal elections because of his executive order, now what Congress is trying to pass called the SAVE Act, that says you have to have either a birth certificate or a driver's license. I'm saying this to validate your point about it is not a given. It is not a given because all the forces of federal government right now are being turned against us in terms of our basic ability to just show up and vote and say who's going to represent us. Here's the thing. None of that is inevitable. That's why we have civil rights litigators and pro-democracy litigators who are litigating these cases. That's why we have brave people standing together, uniting and saying, we'll be plaintiffs in those cases. That's why we have so many grassroots groups, folks in communities figuring out how are we going to organize to make sure people know how to vote, where to vote, and how are we going to create systems of support that ensure that they can. There are many other things we can be doing, but, Leadership Conference, we're doing all those things and supporting all those things through this vast coalition. The other thing we have to remember is as long as people understand what is happening, they won't allow it. And a lot of things that we know to be the case right now is people show up to vote because of what they're voting for. Not just the act of voting, but it's because of what problems they're trying to solve. We right now are going to see 17 million Americans potentially no longer be able to see a doctor when they're sick once this new reconciliation process goes through. We're going to see rural hospitals closing. We're already seeing maternal and child care units closing down when we know that women are desperate to ensure that they don't lose those beds and services. We're seeing students with disabilities starting to get denied services in their schools. It impacts every single person in this country in some way. And people don't like it. So when they are also reminded what to vote for and how to understand where people are trying to come for their basic power to participate so they can say what they want, so that they can hold politicians accountable to what they want, whoever they vote for. We don't tell people who to vote for. We have a very powerful force. So I'm just saying this to say what we have to remind all of us every day is how much power we have and how much we agree on even when we're going to vote for someone different, even if we don't agree on who we're going to vote for. That power is real. It's tappable. We're already starting to see the indicators of it. I used that recent poll on Texas just to say, it's not like Republicans are saying, oh, yeah, go do this. They're saying, wait, what? That's a lot of Republicans saying, I don't understand why you're doing this. That's just one example. We're even seeing how people are wondering, why are people being kidnapped off the streets by masked men who won't identify themselves? By the way, making girls and women vulnerable to being raped, to people being robbed and mugged. That's not public safety. People are already feeling what happens in a government that's not serving people, but serving itself. And we have every opportunity to continue, not just to fight the administration on what's wrong, but to support people in understanding their power to do what they know is right. And that's why it is not inevitable. And I will tell you this, I'll go a step further. None of us are going to let it happen. And what we have to be passionate about is our power. And boy, do we have a lot of it when we count up the majority of this country that is not okay with tyranny.
This episode is brought to you by Americans United for Separation of Church and State. The future of religious freedom is at a crossroads. The same groups behind Project 2025 are working relentlessly to impose a Christian nationalist agenda on the laws and on the lives of the American people. The wall between church and state is the last safeguard standing in their way. For over 75 years, Americans United has been a powerful but quiet force, fighting to preserve church-state separation, freedom without favor, and equality without exception for every single American. Americans United stands up for your right to believe and to live as you choose, so long as you don't harm others. You can take action and join Americans United today by donating any dollar amount, and your support will be doubled. Join Americans United and help defend the fundamental freedoms that protect us all. Learn more and join the fight at au.org/slate. This episode is brought to you by Americans United for Separation of Church and State. The future of religious freedom is at a crossroads. The same groups behind Project 2025 are working relentlessly to impose a Christian nationalist agenda on the laws and the lives of the American people. The wall between church and state is the last safeguard standing in their way. For over 75 years, Americans United has been a powerful but quiet force fighting to preserve church-state separation, freedom without favor, and equality without exception for every single American. Americans United stands up for your right to believe and to live as you choose, so long as you don't harm others. You can take action and join Americans United today by donating any dollar amount, and your support will be doubled. Join Americans United and help defend the fundamental freedoms that protect us all. Learn more and join the fight at au.org/slate.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
I'm going to meet your Tigger energy with like one more lick of Eeyore energy, because the player we haven't...
Oh, come on, Eeyore. I always liked Eeyore. Eeyore was always one of my favorite characters.
I was not born an Eeyore, but I play one on TV. So listen, this is a show about the courts and the Supreme Court, and we haven't talked much about the courts, but I do think we have to sort of nail down there's another player here. And I want to try to kind of describe the pincer move here as best as I understand it. Justice Department, as you've said a couple times, no longer enforcing civil rights laws, gutting the Civil Rights Division, which would have, worked to enforce the Voting Rights Act, right? So that's happening in-house. We've already gone over that. But then we have the Supreme Court looking to kick the legs out from whatever remains of the Voting Rights Act. As I said, that didn't happen this Supreme Court term, although I reserve the right to think it will be next term. And then we've got the Eighth Circuit sort of picking up the breadcrumb trail and saying this is an inexorable journey, right? Thanks, Justice Gorsuch. Thanks, Justice Thomas. Maybe private plaintiffs can't vindicate their civil rights under the Voting Rights Act. The court has been so complicit in this.
The court is captured. The court is captured. So Supreme Court is captured. And we know we have a majority of this court that doesn't like voting rights. We know that. You're absolutely right that their we've got out of the Eighth Circuit basically saying, oh, yeah, no, you can't sue because you as a person, Eeyore, were discriminated against by how the state house drew your maps or, other barriers they're throwing up to you. But it's all to get all the Eeyores of the world and that's discriminatory. You're absolutely right. I didn't say we were going to win because of the Supreme Court. I didn't say litigation was going to save us. That is not what I said. I'm the person running around saying, as a litigator, as someone who litigated civil rights cases, I'm the one who's going to say the courts are not going to save us. But let me just say this. The cases being brought still matter. The litigation still matters for two reasons. One, because it can't go unchallenged. It has to expose the corrupt nature of courts that are being ideological. Most courts, including courts with judges appointed by Republicans, including one of the dissents in one of the Eighth Circuit case, was a Bush appointee. Some are Trump appointees saying no to some of these abuses. We need to remember that. We need to lift that up. There's nothing normal about what's happening. The court is captured. The Supreme Court's captured. But I also am going to tell you, Dahlia, this metaphor is not going to work because I can't be your Christopher Robin to your Eeyore right now because it's just the wrong metaphor. I'll think of another one, but maybe I'm just going to say I'll be your sojourner truth. I'll be your sojourner truth because I'm a Black woman in America. There's nothing you just described that isn't what Black Americans have experienced for centuries. We've had, for the vast majority of our time on this continent as Black people, Latinos, indigenous people were here long before us. They would say, we get this. We know what this looks like. We've had most of our journey on this continent with Supreme Courts that were literally refusing to protect us, literally refusing to take the words and the values of the Constitution and apply it to us. But we won not because we had a Supreme Court. That's not how we really got here. Now, yes, did we have the Warren Court? Yes, we did. The Warren Court did the right things, but it didn't do the right things without a whole lot of wind blowing in its sails because people were organizing, people were working, people were demonstrating, some people who weren't even in institutions, they were just organizing on their own. We had a movement. When our very ability to live up to our ideals as a country come under threat, we come together as a people and rise up peacefully. Let me stress that. When I say rise up, I'm talking about peacefully rising up to say no, because it's our country. It's all of our country. So I didn't say it was inevitable, but remember what we have come from. Remember what we have risen above. Remember that while these forces have never gone away, we have demonstrated that we can. And we have a much larger coalition now and a much more diverse coalition now and a very engaged and very large growing young demographic in this country that is not okay with this. And that gives us real power even when the institutions are captured. So I'm not leaving this point, Dahlia. We need Eeyore, but I am just going to tell you I'm sojourner truth.
I love it. And I actually love, Maya, you've sort of landed us exactly where I wanted to end, which is, I'm hearing echoes of Skye Perriman on this show saying, we do this litigation because we are proving something. We are showing something in district courts around the country to Trump judges and to Bush judges and Reagan judges, and we are winning, and that matters. It doesn't matter what the Supreme Court says. I'm also hearing echoes of Carol Anderson, the people who have said on this show, you just never stood in a line in sneakers to vote in Georgia, but let me tell you what it's like. And you bring a lot of water and you wear a fanny pack and you just bring an extra charger. Like, this is how it has ever been. And what I love about these two ideas coming together and what you're saying is that the work now isn't to sort of sit back and wring your hands and say, oh, well, the court took away the power of district court judges, or the court has conferred, near limitless presidential immunity on Donald Trump. What you're saying is it's actually not their call. And we are seeing this in district courts around the country, that we are seeing judges, surprising no one more than this guy, you stand up and say, actually, it's our call. And even after the birthright citizenship decision, it's still our call. And seeing people meet those courts where they are and be educated by them and inspired and moved. This is a kind of theory of what we're calling popular constitutionalism. I don't have a great name for it, but I think that's what you're giving voice to.
And it's not new to do that. It's not. It's the story of the first Reconstruction and the second Reconstruction. We didn't have the courts on our side after the Civil War. That's why it took another 100 years. Courts didn't give it to us. They didn't give it to us. They came along. They were necessary. And I won't say it's because the Supreme Court doesn't matter, but I do agree it matters what we're doing in lower courts. But also because it helps us do the storytelling. It helps us demonstrate what is important for people to see, to feel, to be able to touch, which is exactly what's going on here. So rather than to get caught up in the distractions, to really focus on where and how they're coming for our power, to simply be citizens. That's what voting is. It's a citizenship power. It's a problem-solving power. I've never seen, I just, because I am going to go back to Texas because it's both where the gerrymandering is underway to try to steal the House, just steal it outright. But it's also where all these children died. All these Christian children, all these white Christian children. And people made phone calls day after day after day for help and couldn't get it from the Department of Homeland Security, which is now becoming the largest federal agency we've ever had in the history of the country, while we're disemboweling the Department of Education, while we're disemboweling the ability of the Department of Justice to be a defender, while we're disemboweling the ability to have health care and for HHS to protect us from pandemics. We're watching this happen in real time, and the more we have this out of touch, we've never seen opinion ratings lower than what we're seeing for the Supreme Court. This is helping us tell a story that is helping people to see what it means in their daily lives. So the litigation also serves that purpose, and that storytelling is critically important.
Maya Wiley is president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, a coalition of over 240 national organizations fighting to protect, defend, and expand the rights of every person in the United States. She has been a litigator at the ACLU, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She's worked in the civil division of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Her memoir, Remember You Are a Wiley, which is the most anti-Eeyore piece of writing you are ever going to find, was published last fall. And Maya, I just, before we say goodbye, I want to thank you because I think what you are doing in the face of, what is a reflexive and maybe understandable impulse to just sit back and watch and feel powerless, is you are naming the project and what it involves. And it is not an easy project, but I think the act of naming it allows us to build it back. And I really, really am grateful, not just for this conversation, but for all the work you've done across your career to do exactly this thing, which is perfect something that has never been perfect.
Well, thank you, Dahlia. That's something I will walk with and that will keep giving me strength. But also, thank you to you, because this podcast is important. Your voice is important, and the way you help us illuminate these things is important. So thank you.
Hey there, it's co-host Mark Joseph Stern to say that's a wrap. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you for supporting our work, and thank you so much for your letters and questions. You can keep in touch at amicus@slate.com, or you can find us at facebook.com/Amicus podcast. Coming up on today's episode of Amicus Plus, available exclusively for Slate Plus members, I'm retiring to the Plusketeer Bar with Jay Willis of Balls and Strikes to talk about Columbia University caving to the Trump administration and the disastrous confirmation of Joshua Devine to a federal court. And we'll answer a burning question frequently posed by listeners. You can subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Amicus show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Amicus Plus to get access wherever you listen. That episode is available for you to listen to right now. We'll see you there. Sarah Birmingham is Amicus's senior producer. Our producer is Patrick Fort. Hillary Fry is Slate's editor-in-chief. Susan Matthews is executive editor. Mia Lobel is executive producer of Slate Podcasts. And Ben Richmond is our senior director of operations. We'll be back with another episode of Amicus next week. Until then, take good care.